Okay, here we are looking at the kidney. So this is a left kidney and with a coronal or sagittal cut through the center of it. So what we can see here are the blood vessels really well. So beginning with the major blood vessels entering the kidney, the red one is the renal artery and the blue one is the renal vein. So the renal artery then branches into segmental arteries, the other semi-major branches. These segmental arteries then branch into interlobar arteries, which are between the renal medullas or the renal pyramids. So interlobar, right here, interlobar arteries. These then go across the top of the renal medulla, and those are the arcuate arteries. These small arteries that go through the cortex are called interlobular arteries. Next to the interlobular arteries, you have these little round balls, and those are the renal corpuscles, and inside those are the glomerulus and the filtering part of the kidney. So these white lines going in the middle of the renal medulla are both the collecting ducts of the nephron and the loops of Henle. So the parts that are loopy are the loops of Henle, and then the long straight lines are the collecting ducts. So on the base of the renal medulla, you have the renal papilla, and then those are sort of a collecting area which go into the calyces. So here you have minor calyx, and then where two minor calyxes come together, you have a major calyx. All of these calyces drain into the renal pelvis, which is this large white area, and the renal pelvis then becomes the ureter, which of course goes to the bladder. Now, these interlobular arteries sit inside the renal cortex, which is this light brown material, the renal cortex, and then the outer dark brown material, which surrounds the entire kidney, is the renal capsule. Okay, on this kidney, we can't see the blood vessels very well, except for the major ones, which again would be the renal artery and the renal vein going in and out of the kidney. The outside of the kidney is the renal capsule. This brown material is the renal cortex. These red things are the renal medullas or the renal pyramids. And those, at the base of them, of course, you have the renal papilla. Those drain into calyces, so you have minor calyces, where two minor calyces come together, you form a major callus, and those drain into the renal pelvis, which then goes out into the ureter. Here is the counterpart for that kidney, so you can see all those structures again. Alright, this is a left kidney attached to the aorta, and the way that you know it's a left kidney is because the renal vein is stretching over the aorta from the inferior vena cava, which would be right here. So the left renal vein is much larger than the right renal vein. So you have the renal vein and the renal arteries going here. This is the kidney. This is the adrenal gland or the suprarenal gland. This is the abdominal aorta. This branch right here is the celiac trunk. This is the superior mesenteric artery, and this down here is the inferior mesenteric artery. These two small arteries coming out the side are the gonadal arteries, which would either be the testicular arteries or the ovarian arteries, depending on if it's a male or a female. The left renal vein has a descending branch, which is either the ovarian or the testicular vein, and an ascending branch, which is the suprarenal vein. So the suprarenal glands, the kidney, abdominal aorta, renal vein, renal arteries. I'm going to turn this over so that you can see the ureter. The ureter extends posteriorly from the kidney and goes down to the bladder. This again is the abdominal aorta. Here again we have another kidney. This is actually a real kidney that's been plasticized, so it's a little more difficult to distinguish all of the major parts, but what you can see here really well is the renal pelvis and the renal medullas, these large white parts. The rest, where it's kind of a red and blue mixture of blood vessels, is the renal cortex. and then the renal artery and the renal vein coming out. So if you turn it over, this is the renal cortex, the covering of the kidney. Here is another kidney, and again we can see the renal pelvis, the renal medullas, with the minor calyces and the major callus, and the renal pelvis that goes to the ureter, the renal cortex, the outer part, and the renal capsule is the very outer capsule that surrounds the entire kidney. Turn it over, it just looks like a kidney bean, except for this little spot at the top is the area where the adrenal gland would sit. Alright, this is showing how the kidneys sit inside the body. So you have the right kidney and the left kidney. Again, the inferior vena cava and the abdominal aorta are the major vessels in the abdominal cavity. The left renal vein stretches over the aorta into the left kidney. So you have the left renal vein, the right renal vein, and the left renal artery right here. So you have the kidneys, the adrenal glands sitting on top, and those are also called the suprarenal glands. The abdominal aorta then bifurcates around L4, lumbar 4, into the common iliac arteries, which then again branch into the external iliac and the internal iliac, and the same with the vena cava. It branches into the common iliac vein, which you can't see very well in this picture. These long yellow things are the ureters. Down here we have the urinary bladder. This is the large intestine right behind it, and then the urethra is the opening to the outside of the body. This model of the kidney again shows the blood vessels. So you have the major blood vessels coming in, which are the renal veins, the renal arteries. The renal artery then splits into segmental arteries, which are going to be the larger branches that initially branch out. Then you have the renal pelvis, the large opening which goes to the ureter, which then goes down into the bladder. The renal pelvis collects urine from major calyces and minor calyces, which collect fluid from the renal papilla and the renal medullas. So you have many renal medullas, and the renal medullas are made up of the collecting ducts and the loops of Henle. The arteries between the medullas, such as here and here, are the interlobar arteries. The arteries going on top of the medulla are the arcuate arteries, and then these little tiny arteries that go out into the cortex are the interlobular arteries, and those are connected to the renal corpuscles. This light brown material where all of this is happening is the renal cortex, and then this outer capsule membrane is the renal capsule. So again, this is a good model to study for the blood vessels. Okay, here we're looking at the nephron, and the nephron is the basic functional unit of the kidney. It's this entire structure. Right up here you have the glomerulus and the renal corpuscle. The glomerulus has an afferent artery that goes into it and an efferent artery that exits, E for exit. The glomerulus then goes into this light pink tube, which is the proximal convoluted tubule, and you know that because it's the one that goes before the loop of Henle. And then you go down here, the green loop is the loop of Henle. When that comes back up, it goes into this purple loopy structure, which is the distal convoluted tubule, which then drains into this yellow collecting duct. So that is the loop of Henle. This major plexus of blood vessels going across the loop of Henle is the vasa recta,